Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and today we're looking at the top 10 best remaster or remakes for video games. Now to help make this list simple, we're going to avoid talking about total reboots and we're also ignoring any unreleased remakes. Number 10, Black Mesa. Black Mesa is a fan-made remake of the original first-person story-driven shooter game Half-Life. What's surprising about Black Mesa is that Valve allowed it to be released and sold for a profit despite it clearly sharing the exact same level designs. The graphics were greatly enhanced using a modern-day version of the source engine, and it's a great way to experience the original Half-Life game for the first time. Unfortunately, the mod isn't complete, and the last few levels, which are arguably the weakest levels in the game, are still not available. Number 9, The Last of Us Remastered. Some of the better remasters are games that we only just played on a previous platform, but were reintroduced to newer consoles with improved performance and resolutions. The Last of Us Remastered is a definitive edition of The Last of Us and allowed players to experience the excellent story-driven game with a high-performance mode that allowed for 60 frames per second at 1080p. And if you own a PS4 Pro, you can also bump the game up to a full native 4K at 30 FPS. The Last of Us Remastered also featured a complete collection of all the multiplayer DLC maps in addition to a few cosmetic items for online play, and remains the definitive version of one of the best PlayStation games. Number 8, Uncharted: The Nathan Drake Collection. The Uncharted collection offers 3 games for the price of 1. All 3 original PS3 Uncharted games retain their visual quirks, but with enhanced resolutions and vastly improved frame rates, making for a much smoother and consistent experience. Unfortunately, the multiplayer modes for both Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 were not included in the collection, but the collection is the absolute best way to experience the full story with uncompromised visual quality on the PS4. Number 7, Grand Theft Auto 5. When Grand Theft Auto 5 was announced, it seemed odd that Rockstar had no plans on releasing it for the next-gen consoles that were just a few months away. But even on the PS3 and Xbox 360, GTA 5 became one of the most successful video game releases of all time, with massive record-breaking sales. Eventually, Rockstar announced a remastered version of the game for PS4 and Xbox One with a more consistent 30 frames per second, increased resolution, and a ton of new game features. In addition to these features, the next-gen version of the game also allowed for further improvements to the game's online multiplayer, which simply weren't possible on the older generation due to limitations in hardware. Eventually, this remastered version was remastered even more when it released for PC, and featured a ton of graphical enhancements with incredibly smooth 60 frames per second and great overall optimization. Grand Theft Auto 5 on PC is still on Steam's top seller list and originally had an overwhelmingly positive average Steam review. Number 6, Counter-Strike Source. Counter-Strike is one of the world's most popular shooter video games and has dominated the competitive scene for decades. While Global Offensive is currently the most popular Counter-Strike game, it fails to deliver a large majority of the maps from the original Counter-Strike game. Counter-Strike Source seems like the ultimate package with tons of maps and vastly improved visuals over the original game. The game's fast-paced and difficult-to-master shooter gameplay is retained even after all of these years and is still cherished by PC gamers. Number 5, Ratchet & Clank Remastered. Now we're getting to some of the really cool remasters. Ratchet & Clank is a third-person platformer/shooter game with colorful visuals and quirky characters. It originally released for the PlayStation 2 in 2002 and was followed by a ton of sequels, all of which did relatively well. In 2016, the same developers returned and completely overhauled the original game's visuals in addition to enhancing the game's controls and modifying the level layout to make it more consistent. Ratchet & Clank was released alongside a Ratchet & Clank movie and featured a few cutscenes that were actually scenes from this movie, but these scenes felt like forced advertising and felt out of place. The game itself is an excellent remake of a classic PlayStation platformer. Number 4, DuckTales Remastered. DuckTales was a platforming game released in 1989 based on the popular Disney cartoon from the same time period. It featured side-scrolling classic platforming with Scrooge McDuck and allowed players to hop around on his cane to overcome obstacles. In 2013, the game was remade from the ground up with greatly improved visuals, enhanced controls, and even expanded on the game's original story with new voice acting from the original voice actors. Most reviews praised this game's new visual improvements and streamlined gameplay, but criticized the new enhanced story due to its tendency to interrupt the flow of the gameplay. Number 3, Resident Evil. The original Resident Evil came out in 1996 for the PlayStation 1 and Windows and was the game that jump-started the survival horror genre. In 2002, a remastered version of the game was released for the Nintendo GameCube with greatly improved graphics, new voiceover work, and improved controls, but despite being an excellent remaster, sold very poorly, convincing Capcom to start evolving the franchise into a more action-oriented quick-time event mess. In 2015, the GameCube remaster was again remastered and made available for PC, PS4, and Xbox One, and was received incredibly well, with higher resolution textures, more improved handling, and an overall great revival of a classic. Number 2, Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy. Crash Bandicoot was a massive success and a major mascot of the PlayStation in the mid-90s, and ever since Naughty Dog abandoned the franchise in 1999, the series has had a bunch of less than stellar sequels that seem to get further and further away from the original design. Thankfully, after 20 years, Crash Bandicoot was finally announced to be making a return to the PlayStation 4. Vicarious Visions took on the task to make the original 3 platforming games and remaster them with greatly improved visuals, a 1440p resolution, and a solid 30 frames per second. They also added in new features like time trials into the first 2 games and the ability to play as Crash's sister Coco in all of the levels. The game plays just like the original with the same difficult handling, and the developers even made sure to retain the same little bugs and glitches that speedrunners have been using in the original game for decades. Vicarious Vision even took the original soundtrack and remade it for improved audio quality and added their own flair to it without disrupting the original style. Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy is an excellent example of a remake done right. But before I reveal my top pick, here's a few honorable mentions. And my number 1 pick for Best Remaster is Tomb Raider Anniversary. Tomb Raider Anniversary is a complete remake of the original Tomb Raider game from 1996. Every single room from the original game was reimagined with an entirely new graphics engine and vastly improved visuals, in addition to reimagined puzzles that took inspiration from the original, but still make this remake its own game. Combat, movement, climbing, everything in terms of controls has been greatly improved thanks to Tomb Raider Legends engine, and Crystal Dynamics even went as far as to remake the original soundtrack, giving the occasional stinger that played when a bear jumped out at you the much needed and much more epic improvement. In addition to all these gameplay and visual improvements, Anniversary also expands on the game's story and shows a new side of Lara's original adventure, where Lara learns to kill for the first time. It's the first game we get a real personality for Lara after 10 years of watching her flip around on screen, and it inspired the hugely successful reboot series of Tomb Raider games. You can tell that a real level of appreciation for the source material went into this game with every room, and it's a great nostalgic playthrough while also being its own game. Tomb Raider Anniversary is not only the best Tomb Raider game ever made, but also the best example of how a remake or remaster should be done. And that's my list of top 10 remakes or remasters in video games. What did you guys think? Any remakes I should have mentioned? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe for top 10 videos published every week.